Why don't we start with you, Joey, since a lot of the Senator Lombardi.
Joey, before you start, I've been waiting 45 minutes to the answer to this question. Does it cost the AG's office money to get a national background check? And secondarily, does it cost law enforcement generally money for a background check?
I'll start with Senator Golden's bill so we can talk about that issue. Anytime the AG's office or any police department sends a fingerprint down to the FBI, it costs us $17. And that's why national background checks in our office are $35. Half of it goes directly to the FBI and half of it goes into escrow to maintain the lines that the FBI requires us to have. So yes, there is a charge. That's for an FBI fingerprint-based check. If you do a check through NCIC or III, then that's a date of birth check that does not require a fee. So we support in law enforcement and people that are accredited by FBI to have a national background check supported by fingerprints because it's more accurate than your date of birth or your name, which is what Senator Golden's bill seeks to do. When you get a fingerprint and try to submit it to the FBI, they will reject them unless you have statutory authorization. So right now, while we're collecting fingerprint cards on new applicants only, not on renewals, and the police departments might follow their own ways, we cannot send them to the FBI. So our office then goes through a 50-state NCIC III background check of a person's criminal history, when literally we could just submit the print and get the results back if we could do the fingerprint check. That's all that bill is about. It's an administrative function. It's not about the NICS index, which I've heard tonight. That has nothing to do with the purchase of a firearm from an FFEL. That is not about NICS. This is mainly about the concealed carry permitting process and allowing an actual proper national background check go through. So that's why we did put in Senator Golden's bill and why we support it and thank her for putting that bill in. Does that clarify any of those issues?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I will be quick tonight. We put in lots of written testimony, as the committee knows, so, Chairman, I will move as fastly as I can. We are in support of Senate Bill 2490, Senate Bill 2491, and Senate Bill 2492. I note that the difference from last year on those bills that there seems to be more discretion with the court. We think that is appropriate. However, we also think that this bill does something very clear, and that ensures that the firearm gets out of the hand of the abuser. And we think that is appropriate, and it reflects federal law of not being able to possess a firearm under those circumstances. As for 2517 and 2730, these are Majority Whip Goodwin's bills that she put in on behalf of the Attorney General. This is the domestic misdemeanor possession ban. So our current law is a conflict of law in two ways, and we've been trying to address this for several years. Our definitional section says that a crime of violence includes a conviction for a domestic felony conviction, which would be a lifetime ban under 1147(8) subsection A and federal law. However, if you look down to 1147(5) subsection B, it says that it's only, for a 2-year period following that conviction. So federal law in subsection A says it's a lifetime ban, and subsection B says it's a 2-year ban. We want to clear up that language. That's what this bill does. But it also addresses the misdemeanor possession offenses. Under federal law, as you know, domestic misdemeanor convictions cannot purchase a firearm until their rights have been restored or that conviction's been expunged. This bill, 2517, speaks to that. However, we have put in an alternative bill to that, which is 2730, after hearing from the Second Amendment Coalition, and that would be a 10-year after the successful completion of the domestic sentence. So that's for the committee's decision of how they want to deal with that issue or how they want to proceed, if at all. But we did give two alternatives. We think it's important that the conflict in law be addressed because it's confusing to people that have domestic felony convictions what the proper thing is. And as for the misdemeanors, I do think that sends a signal to domestic violence victims. How seriously are we taking these cases when federal law prohibits my offender from being able to carry, but state law allows them to possess? How long you want to do that ban, that's certainly a policy decision left to you. We gave two different options for the committee's consideration. Senator Pagliarini's bill, Senate Bill 2416, we are opposed to reciprocity agreements, and the reason we're opposed to reciprocity is because other states' permitting processes are very different than Rhode Island's, and their permitting standards might not be up to par as ours, and that might bring certain individuals who we do not want carrying into our state without restriction.
Senator Lombardi.
On that point, Joey, where do we stand in terms of our strictness in terms of an application for concealed weapon vis-a-vis, let's say, in this case, the relevant states, Mass, Connecticut, and Utah?
Well, I think that we heard from Frank that Utah allows 35 other states reciprocity, so I'm assuming theirs are pretty open. There's a.
I didn't read it that way. I read him to say that Utah. Did I read him inappropriately to say that yes, Utah accepts reciprocity from 35 states. So, but what's the standard in Utah? Presumably, if they accept reciprocity, their standard in Utah has to be at or stricter than the ones that they accept. Correct?
Yes,
why would I accept it out of state?
My thought is we don't know what the floor is.
Okay, let's assume Utah is obviously the white elephant in the room. Let's talk about Mass and Connecticut, because they're our bordering states. Where do we fall in terms of our requirements vis-a-vis Mass and Connecticut for a concealed permit?
I know that Massachusetts and Connecticut have a different permitting process than us that requires, they do yearly reviews. We do 4-year reviews. But the standards are somewhat similar, but I don't know the exact answer to that. I can get back to you on that, though.
Following up on that, who in your office would be the one who would track the different states and what their standards are?
Our permitting office would be.
They'd be the ones who would track it? If you can get that information back to us.
Do that.
And I would like, Senator Lombardi said, compare it to Utah to see what their standards are.
I'm trying to find that. Sorry, I'm trying to look at that bill. We'll get that information to you, Chairman. The next bill is the orange tip bill. That's the one that changes the altered firearm statute to add the insertion of the orange or other brightly colored tip. We've had incidents nationally, but we've also had incidents in Rhode Island recently of people removing the orange tip and committing crimes to make it look like it's a real weapon. That's a very dangerous scenario because it puts the public on notice. It puts the gun possessor in harm's way with people not knowing it's a fake gun, and it also puts law enforcement in peril.
Senator Lombardi.
You perhaps were not in the room at the time, but there was a representation made by Mr. O'Neill that somehow in the House hearing on the obliteration issue, there was an inadvertent redaction of obliterating the manufacturing and all of that stuff. Was that inadvertent? Or
I wouldn't call it inadvertent. It was stricken purposely by our prosecutors who wrote the bill. However, we've taken a relook at the bill and are working on a sub-A to address that and several other issues. So I wouldn't call it inadvertent, but we're aware of it and working on it. Also, because we left out in the bill the people that insert an orange chip on the firearm to make it look fake. So that's one of the other issues we're addressing, but we do think this is a serious issue to be considered. Another bill that we support is 2564. Chairman Miller sponsored that for the Attorney General. That's the straw purchaser bill. That's the person who goes into a dealership to buy a firearm who's not qualified to own one. The federal government has this law. It's been held up by the United States Supreme Court, and many other states have it as well. Our laws are blank on the issue. We're trying to really look at gun laws that we know are affecting public safety. Illegal guns on our streets are one of them, and we think this bill really attempts to try and fix that. Weapons penalties. This is also a bill by Chairman Miller that's sponsored on the behalf of the Attorney General, Senate 2565. This is about carrying the long arm on the street, the long gun on the street. And I heard Frank Sakosha's testimony about 114710. We would love to speak to him about that because we do think it's an issue that people could walk down Smith Street with a long gun. This is like Omar from The Wire, if anyone ever saw that movie. It's something that we think needs to be addressed. Not that it's happening in common occurrence, but I don't think we should promote that activity either. And then finally, I know that Frank talked about 114730 and third-party liability. He may be right about third-party liability on that. But really what this bill is, that's a sentence enhancement to someone who already unlawfully transferred a firearm to a minor. So it's not necessarily third-party liability because that minor went and killed someone or committed a crime of violence. It's a sentence enhancement because you illegally gave a gun to a minor and then that minor went and used that gun in a crime of violence. So it might be a way of looking at a distinction, but yeah, an important distinction because we know in our communities right now that older gang members are giving guns to minors because the penalties are less. We don't want that to happen. That only enables the gun violence we have on our streets, which leads me to 2645 by Senator Metz, and I thank you so much, Senator Metz, for being such a great sponsor on this bill. This is the possess and use issue. It's not illegal for a minor to have a weapon in their possession unless they discharge it. I don't think that is the message we want to send. And I know that Mike was talking about the hunting exemption and having hunters that are 15 be with their parents. That's not a clear reading of that section. There's an exemption for hunting, which is the 15 and above age. And then there's the exemption for the person who's not hunting, but are otherwise engaged in unlawful activities with a parent or a guardian. So I want to make that clear. We're trying in our best interest to make these gun laws usable for the youth who enjoys firearms. However, there has to be some public safety on that as well.
Senator Archibald.
So then, Joey, I am reading that right on 2645 on line 19, where it says are engaged in lawful hunting activity as provided. It's broad, so it means that if you have a hunting license and you're engaged in lawful activity, irrespective of the age, if you're old enough to have the hunting license, then you can possession of the firearm.
That's correct. And much of those exemptions, just for the committee's knowledge, really recodify what is currently in law in lines 5 through 15. So it wasn't a rewrite, it was trying to make it more clear. And I know that some people say there's other crimes we could charge. Certainly, carrying a pistol without a license if you're carrying it on the street, firing in a compact area could charge that too. But for that minor who's storing that weapon in their vehicle or in their home for the older gang member to come get it, it's still that community gun that's being used on our streets, as Senator Metz talked about. And that's really the issue that we're trying to address.
What about, I grew up on a farm. We had a lot of land, and I had shotguns at a young age. And so I heard that comment about the prosecution. I'll tie it, but I'm just talking from practical experience here. What about a car? Hey, easy. What about a carve-out for someone who's not necessarily engaging in lawful hunting activities, but is on a property where they have the ability, a juvenile has the ability to target practice or to sight in a gun? I don't see them covered by the language of this bill.
They're not, because the bill says that they would still have to be accompanied by a qualified adult, a parent, or a guardian. And we've been struggling. When I tell you that this bill has been in since 2003, it's been in since 2003. This is the 13th year we've heard this bill.
That's just a follow-up. That's where you lose me on this bill, because, you could put on the, and some may roll their eyes, but you can put on the Discovery Channel and find some guy up in Maine who's training his children who are 6 years old and can handle a firearm better than adults. It's a relative thing. The experience is a relative thing. And so if you're a juvenile, I know because I was properly trained in guns at a young age, and if I were 15 or 16 years old and I was sighting in a firearm on my farm, I wouldn't want to be accused of creating criminal conduct because I'm not included. That I have a real problem with that not being included in this language.
Well, and I don't disagree with you, and that's the struggle that's been. Number one, that behavior is criminal right now. The kid on the farm possessing the firearm or shooting at the can, that's exactly what this statute covers. So I get the argument, but I want it to make clear that that's criminal activity right now. If the juvenile goes on the farm, shoots the can, that's a crime. It might not be enforced, but it's a crime. Our issue with trying to get the exemption that fits your scenario is, what does that look like? Is it a farm property that's 5 acres? Is it a space of 500 yards? Is it 10-year-olds on 500 yards? Is it 12-year-olds on 100? Defining that exemption is an incredibly delicate thing that I don't know if we've got anywhere close to that yet.
Well, respectfully, I don't know if it is. We have setbacks from how far you have to be from discharging a firearm, right? So if you start from that premise that you got to be 500 feet back, if somebody's from any house, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, I don't remember, is it 500 feet? I don't remember exactly, but I think it's 500 feet back. If you're already 500 feet back and you can lawfully discharge the firearm and all your other conduct is lawful but you're a juvenile, what's the issue? That's where I'm lost. That's where I'm lost. So just a thought. I'm just planting a seed. I don't know that we have to go through reinventing the wheel. You know, it's a constitutional right. I'm not quite sure we can move on, but it's something that bothered me. And I stepped into the snare last year, right? I put the same scenario out when I knew you were going to say, that's already criminal activity. I put the same scenario out. I knew what I was doing. Go easy down there.
Senator Lombardi.
Joey, if I may,
Yeah.
I want to
Of course.
take a deep breath and take a step back. We've been at it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is. What concerns me about this whole area is we put these gun bills on every year. We have folks wearing yellow pins. We have folks that are against domestic violence. I think most of us want to wear yellow pins, and most of us are against domestic violence. I mean, it's pretty simple. And we got the AG's office that's supporting bills or proposing bills. What troubles me of the last 3.5 hours that we've been up here is that I asked Frank Sicoscio a question. I don't know if you were in the room when I asked him.
I was watching in the
Well,
gallery.
I asked him a question if he had spoken to all of the sponsors of the bills, and he had not. And I think, and I'm not certainly, I probably agree with Frank more than I disagree with Frank. There are areas where, there's a point, there's a line. I am as pro-gun as the next person, but there's a line when if someone, beats a domestic partner, I got a problem with that. But my point is, it seems like we go through this machination every year. We sit here, we hear pro-guns, we hear domestic violence, both of which are very, very, very serious issues. We got the AG that is advocating for certain things, and there's nobody that does their job better than you do. I've told you that 1,000 times. But never the three shall meet. And 3 years ago, I can recall the president was wise enough to have a gun control behavioral medicine subcommittee. And I think some very serious recommendations came out of that committee. I was very fortunate to be part of that 20 or 21 member committee. And we attacked the issue of behavioral health. And perhaps this is a rhetorical question, but shouldn't we get in a room where everybody knows everybody's position and be able to come up with some poignant, matter-of-fact, intelligent gun-based bills? Is that a pie in the sky?
I don't think it's a pie in the sky. I think that's what this process is. I think that's why I have a job. I think that's why you guys are elected. I think that we're supposed to make great public policy based on, conversations that we have.
But every single, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but every single argument, beginning with yours, are poignant arguments. They really are. I mean, Frank Sikosha does his job well. Deb's going to do her job well. I know she's going to do her job well. You do your job phenomenally well. But no one, George, I'm not so sure. But I'm teasing George. I'm teasing. George is my dear friend. But it just, never the three shall meet.
Well, I can tell you, Senator, that the Attorney General met with the Second Amendment Coalition 2 years ago about Senator Lombardo's legislation that we've spoken about tonight. There are provisions in there that our office finds absolute non-starters. And when we start at that position and other groups find things non-starters, then you equally come to a stalemate fast. In talking about Senator Lombardo's bill, and I've spoken to Senator Lombardo a lot about that bill. We've met as recently as last session. We talked as recently as tonight, and I really do respect what he's trying to do, and I respect him as a senator and as a man. But we don't agree with having our application going to statute, because if we wanted to make one change as like a typographical error, we'd have to go back in front of this body and seek the change. And you've seen how contested gun bills are. If we needed one change in the application, we'd have to come back to the General Assembly to get that changed. So there's ways we could talk about, like having an APA hearing for appeals that we could sit and talk about and try and work through if concealed carry permit holders think they need a better avenue for adjudication. But I think it's everyone being open to having a conversation and finding a compromise. And I include my side of the table on that as well. You have to have people around a table that are saying, we're going to come up with something because this matters, and we're going to negotiate it out, and this is what true negotiation is. I think, to answer your question.
But respectfully, and I respect Senator Lombardo for no other reason than he sounds like me, but sounds like my name. But the bigger picture, Senator Lombardo's bill, relatively speaking, and I hate to use this word, is on the spectrum, is perhaps at the 3 or 4, whereas the domestic violence felonies and guns are more 10. Is that fair to say?
In certain ways, yes.
Okay, so why aren't we? I only because I know you the best at the table right now, so I can pick on you the most. So, but why aren't we coming to a table and reaching something that? And it is no doubt in my mind. There is no doubt in my mind that there is an area, and I thought perhaps based on what I had heard out there that one of the Senator Coyne's bills was close. Where we get to the area of true. God forgive me for using the word. I'm not going to say that. Sincere, serious domestic violence, not to include domestic disorderly kind of behavior and a possession of a gun that results in a felony conviction. Perhaps I articulated it best that way. I can't believe that the great minds in this room and those that have testified before aren't capable of coming to 2 or 3 sincere, hardcore, sensible gun control bills that take the gun out of the hands of those who don't deserve to have the gun in their hand. Is that fair to say?
I absolutely agree.
Okay. I know, maybe I'm frustrated.
Senator Metz.
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, I want to build on what Senator Lombardi said. For me, not becoming numb to the situation. There's got to be room for improvement. And when I just think about the cases, it was several years ago, and a young man, honor student, track star, walking home from church on Good Friday, got blown away. Still don't know who did it. I'll never forget it. His mother's name is Geneva Johnson. And after her grief, what does she do? She volunteers at the Rhode Island Training School, trying to help out somebody else's son. very courageous woman, Trixie, a former student of mine, Hartford Avenue, her son was murdered. After Trixie got past her grief, what does she do? She volunteers over at the Center for Nonviolence. And I could just go on and on. And the worst thing for me, law-abiding citizens, by the way. These are law-abiding citizens. People that live in the neighborhood that are trying to do the right things by their kids, make sure they get their education and stay on the straight and narrow. Then, not just in my role as a deacon, not just in my capacity here, when I have to go to a wake for a teenager and see all the kids crying because of the violence. So so we're looking at the budget for mental health. Is there enough money in mental health? Well, a lot of our kids, they say a lot of the kids that have to walk through gang territory have post-traumatic stress, like they were in a war zone or something. Even where I'm at, I'm still in my grandfather's house. People say, well, Howard, you and your wife was teachers, you at the top step. How come you stayed in that neighborhood? Well, I wanted to make it a better place. And so when I have my windows open in the summer, on Friday, Saturday night, I can hear the gunshots. And we're law-abiding citizens. Forget the criminals. So the law-abiding citizens, because you live in a poor neighborhood, you should have some peace of mind wherever it comes from. So I agree totally with Senator Lombardi. We've come to a point in this country where we just dig in our heels at everything. I'm praying for candidates that can bring the country together and not all this negativity and this foolishness we're seeing now. It's a great country, but not if we keep going at the rate we're at. And so it's not going to be my wish. It's going to be my prayer that people can get together to come up with something that's reasonable so that we can protect law-abiding citizens, whether they're black or white, rich or poor, regardless of what neighborhood they're in. You can't tell me that things can't get better. But for me to put up my position and you to put up your position and nothing gets done and we're seeing young lives wasted, that's a travesty in itself if we're not willing to work together. We may not, up here I learned a long time ago, especially some of the positions I take, we may not agree on everything, but there's some things that we can find some common ground. And sometimes when people argue with me, I tell them, you may not agree with my constituents' position on certain issues, but the last time I checked, we're all Americans and we're entitled to our opinion. And so I just wanted to share that. But I do agree with Senator Lombardi. Something at some point has to be done. There can be improvement. We can make improvement. We can make improvements to try to make it better for everyone. And we just have to stop, as I said earlier, digging in our heels and nothing gets done. And then I got to go to another wake. And instead of reading this for the people, I got to read this. I keep my little Proverbs and the New Testament Proverbs. I keep it in my top pocket because I never know when I'm going to need it, here or in the community. But we have to do something to try to make things better. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. Sadly, it's 13 years, but at some point we do have to work together. I agree with Senator Lombardi. I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Archibald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joey, to get back to Senator Lombardo's bill, has the AG's office sat down with him to try to, I know you said there were some non-starters, and with non-starters it leads to a sort of a stalemate. That bill we talked about in detail last year, and there was a lot of testimony, the Police Chiefs Association and your testimony and other interested stakeholders, if you will. And it's clear that it's an area where we need to make a well-defined policy that can be followed. And I understand the difference between having the policy in an AG's office that can change with a new administration as opposed to in statute, and I get the concerns. But that's an area where I think there's been a lot of progress, I think you'd admit, from the last time that bill was before us. Have you had any sit-downs with Senator Lombardo?
We last met with Senator Lombardo at the end of last session last year. I talked to him tonight. There's things that we have tried to accomplish in our application to address some of the concerns of him and interested parties. That hasn't come to fruition yet, but we continue to work on them.
Are you optimistic that there could be something worked out in this session, or no?
In regards to what?
In regards to creating a well-defined system that has uniformity throughout the state, so you don't have arbitrary decisions made by varying police departments or the Attorney General's office. And let me just add to that, I just had to give a legal opinion in one of the towns I represent as an assistant solicitor with respect to issuing a firearm permit. And the AG's office was on one page, the police chief was on the other page. It's an area where you need uniformity. There's a pressing need for uniformity, just like there's a pressing need for protections in domestic violence. And we'll get to that in a minute, but there's a need for uniformity there. And I'm not saying that you should concede. I'm just saying that I know Senator Lombardo's not here, but that's an area where I think that with a little bit of tweaking, you may come up with something that sets a standard.
I think that the concealed carry permit issue is complicated because you have 39 different licensing authorities, right? So you're dealing with the licensing for CCWs with 39 different people in a very small square footage with a very small jurisdictional thing. I'm not going to comment on the cities and towns jurisdiction over things because it's inappropriate for me to do so. I can speak to the AG's handling of things, and we get about 80 to 85% of all CCW permit applications in the state. Our approval of those applications are around 85% of new. Our approval of renewal applications is about 98%. So I understand that people have complaints about the system, and we can surely talk about that. We can surely talk about putting them all together, but I think from our end, we're handling this pretty good from an AG standpoint. So I just wanted to put that out there from
it's not. Let me just go back, and I respect what you're saying, but this is. Let me cut right through all that. This isn't about whether you're handling good or bad. There's a problem because there isn't uniformity, and I've personally been dealing with it. Not just that one example with that town, other examples, and there needs to be a well-defined policy. And I don't think it should be all under the roof of one attorney general, because that can change with a different administration. And the intent of this bill to make it a uniform policy, regardless of who sits in that seat, someone may not be an advocate of the Second Amendment. And what we have there, we have an erosion completely of a constitutional right. We don't want that. This bill seeks to protect that. At the same time, you have this, as you said, you have the different police chiefs out there who aren't on the same page. One in East Providence wasn't even issuing the permits. So clearly, but yet, respectfully, the police chiefs, I think, are in the best position to be able to make a decision as to who's sound and who isn't sound in a community for mental health. I think we'd all agree on that. When you're trying to get the guy that's the lunatic, where, man, a woman that has an unstable mind, they're in the best position to say, well, I know that guy, and I know that woman. I've dealt with them before, and maybe you should deny the permit. So with that said, you're doing a great job, and the police chiefs are in the best position. I won't beat it to death, and we'll leave it. But I think this is one of those bills where if we could just somehow make some concessions. It's too bad Senator Lombardo wasn't here, but maybe you could. You're very proactive. You do a great job. Maybe you could seek him out and try to make some change. I'm not a co-signer of this bill, but this is an important bill. I think this bill really needs to be something that's tweaked and put into a well-defined policy, because if it isn't, we're going to go through 2 more years of just, or a whole nother year of decisions that aren't being made uniformly. Almost just a statement rather than it is. You don't really have the answer. I'm just putting it out there. I have faith in you.
Senator Lombardo.
Again, we call each other brother, but I don't want Senator Lombardo's bill to be the poster child about what we're trying to get to tonight. I think it's the other end of the spectrum. I really do. And I thought that, there's, for lack of a better term, there's some bills that are down here, and there are bills here. And I really I think that the great starting point should be with Senator Coyne's bill. I really do. And I think that that's the bill where I have heard it certainly seeks to protect some areas, some serious areas of domestic violence victims. It certainly seems to be a starting point for the Second Amendment folks. Certainly, if it seeks to restrain the improper use of guns, it certainly should be an AG priority. I know it's an AG priority. And so, the chairman is always so gracious, and maybe it's us, maybe it's the legislature to blame, that, we throw everyone in a room and everyone states their opinion, and there's no consensus that's gained other than we stay here and we listen to everyone's opinion, we respect everyone's opinion, but nothing's happened. But the chairman is always so gracious to provide his office for, the people a little lower on the totem pole like me, and to meet with people. And maybe that's the room where Deb, yourself, Frank Sicoscio, and maybe somebody, a representative from the legislature, sits there and puts together a sensible, common sense gun bill, for lack of a better term, that protects the victims of domestic violence while also protecting the Second Amendment rights of those who are law-abiding citizens. And I think that, if anything, that should be the goal of this discussion tonight. Nothing else. You know what? The Frank Lombardo argument about 39 inconsistent applications, that can apply to permitting for zoning, that can apply to probate law, that can apply to licensing, it applies to everything. Unfortunately, we are a state of 39 separate fiefdoms. It's the story of the world. When I was in the probate court in Providence, we used to say that there were 39 Supreme Court justices of the probate court, or chief justices of the probate court. That's just a function of Rhode Island. That's unfortunately a byproduct of what we are. But I think if we go the other way with that bill, again, maybe I'm a kid at Christmas time thinking that we can do this, but we're close. We can do that.
Yeah, respectfully to my brother, we pretty much in uniformity on a lot of the bills, but let me just be clear. They're all important to me. The 39 cities and towns, it's a critical issue because I deal with it. I also, in the past year, got a group of people together, just in the light you're talking about, with respect to a particular bill and domestic violence before us tonight, and several of who are in this room tonight on opposing sides, to talk about making progress on that domestic violence bill. And I had the consent of the sponsor, and we made some marked progress, and George will talk about that in a minute on that bill. They're all important. I get your passion, brother. I love you. They're all important. But the 39 cities and towns, if I don't talk about it tonight right now, when am I going to talk about it? So I've made my point. We can move on. In a minute, we'll get to the domestic violence bill, and we don't have to beat it to death. They're all important. That's why we're in the room. They're all important.
I didn't, Senator, I didn't suggest that anything is less important than the other, but I think that if there's anything that's going to come out of this legislative session, it should be at the point of guns and domestic violence and the lawful use Second Amendment rights. I think that's it. Permitting issues and who should get a concealed license between municipalities, among municipalities, well, that unfortunately is a byproduct of what Rhode Island. I didn't mean to deminimize that at all. What I intend is that perhaps at some point we can reach a common ground on a substantive aspect in this area, as opposed to, debating until 11:30 and holding everything for further study. That's all.
Joe, you can proceed.
Chairman, I don't think I could finish any better than any of that. We're available to help do whatever the committee wants us to do.